But gentlemen, please.
It's a series about a stage magician who inserts himself into people's problems, which sounds like a great premise for a television show or the opening line for the prosecution in a stalking case.
Yeah.
Bill Bixby plays a master of illusion in The Magician. The Magician is a one-season wonder from 1973 that seems to be a mix of a drama about an amateur sleuth and an action-adventure series along the lines of British imports like the ones produced by ITC.
Wait, The Magician, Bill Bixby's TV show.
In the 1960s, actor Bill Bixby had become a TV star as Ray Walston's foil on the sitcom My Favorite Martian, and later starred in the comedy drama The Courtship of Eddie's Father. Bixby was himself an amateur magician, and so his next major starring role on television would be about his favourite subject, which is a bit like if William Shatner starred as himself in a biopic based on his autobiography.
I know this comes as a shock to you.
The Magician would chop and change slightly over its short run, changing character names after the pilot, and it received a mid-season makeover that tinkered with the premise in order to gee up the show's not terrible but not great ratings. 50 plus years later, we know the show didn't last past one season, but how is it? In watching the show properly for the first time, it's mostly pretty good. The Magician's pilot premiered on NBC in March of 1973, with a full season ordered for the fall 1973 television season.
That's the good news. And the bad news? She didn't stay there very long.
Popular stage magician Tony Blake is a charming and compassionate magician. His stage act is doing well, but he's had a tough past.
10 years ago, South America. He was imprisoned on a trumped-up espionage charge.
Where he met a rich guy in jail who died and bequeathed Tony his fortune. Alright. This backstory is mentioned a few times in early episodes in order to explain why a famous stage magician is sticking his oar in your private business.
But so grateful for the few months of freedom provided by Tony that he left him a fortune. A considerable fortune.
Tony Blake puts on his magic shows wherever he needs to be and lives on a private jet and has the assistance of his pilot, Jerry Anderson. No, not that one. He also has the help of a wealthy journalist, Max Pomeroy, who has contacts everywhere, as well as Max's wheelchair-bound son, Dennis.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Tony Blake.
Tony Blake also has a knack of meeting people in trouble, where he will step in to help. He's not an outright brawler, preferring to use his talents to outsmart crooks using sleight of hand, illusion, and whatever clever tricks he needs to get the job done. One might call him a sticky beak, poking his nose into other people's business even after they've politely asked him to keep out, but there would be no show otherwise. Which is like if Columbo was taking backhanders to let the murderers get away with murder.
That's my specialty, you know. Homicide.
Unfortunately, when the ratings came in at the end of the season, there would also be no show.
I think I know what'll help.
What? 43, 44. I can't.
Come on, it's for your own good.
The Magician started with a pilot episode where famous illusionist Anthony Dorian became involved in a spy plot that also helped set up the characters for the series, at least until the mid-season retooling.
I think you know you're interfering in something that's none of your business.
Well, that may be true, but Mrs. Coogan is a very nice lady whose life was being threatened.
His private jet/mobile home has all the mod cons. With a live-in pilot, Jerry, Tony would drive around in a white Corvette, complete with a car phone, and would often call on the assistance of journalist Max Pomeroy, who knew absolutely everyone, while Max's son Dennis would often do the hard research.
I keep microfilm records of all photos taken of me in my world travels. We're going to look at some now.
The weekly series saw some minor tweaks, namely renaming some of the characters, but was generally along the lines of the pilot. Tony Blake happens across somebody in need of help. They often ask him to piss off and mind his own business, but he insists.
I accept it when you do this sort of thing for other people. I'm not sure I like it when you do it for me. Putting yourself in obvious danger.
I'm not in danger, Max.
There might be a chase, and in the end, Blake would use magical tricks and illusion to outsmart the crooks each week.
Oh, you mean goodbye for good.
This was Bill Bixby's show, and he was in almost every scene, asking questions, investigating, doing a fair bit of entering people's homes without permission. One might even classify that as breaking and entering.
Don't tell me you've run out of ideas.
Oh, no, I'm still thinking about it, but I'm sure if we put our heads together, we can come up with something.
Tony Blake is charming and confident, rarely to be seen with a hair out of place, which funnily enough was a trait that would follow the star to a later series. Tony Blake didn't get into fistfights all that often. There were the odd scuffles and a little wrestling and a few chases. But when confronted with a physically imposing villain, Blake would use his magic skills, misdirection, deception, sleight of hand, and whatever else happened to be lying around to create his distractions and diversions. Illusion and sleight of hand are incredibly useful tricks to know. How else could you be an uncle without knowing how to do this? The magic was the unique selling point of the show, so much so that a voiceover was soon added to the opening credits.
All of the magic you're about to see is performed without trick photography of any kind by Bill Bixby, the magician.
So, at least later on, it was Bill Bixby performing his own illusions. Watching the early episodes, The Magician feels fairly unique in that it's not really a pure action series, and at the same time, not a pure detective show like Columbo. It's a reasonably unique mix of the two. It has a little bit of the DNA of a British adventure series made by ITC, the wealthy and charming troubleshooter with no money worries who gets involved in helping out people without even the thought of ever invoicing anybody for gas money. And of course, he has a cool car like the Saint or the Baron or the Persuaders. Tony Blake has a white Corvette with the vanity plate Spirit. I too have names for my vehicles. My helicopter is called Chop of the Pops, my speedboat is called Boaty Call, and I call my 2003 Land Rover Discovery, depending on how I feel on the day, Useless Paperweight or Love Hotel for Rats.
Who's he?
The Great Blake. Or is it Blake the Great?
It's Mr. Blake.
A lot of the times when I revisit or discover for the first time some stuff from the 60s, 70s and 80s, some stuff can feel really slight and formulaic, and other shows will hold up better. Yes, there are dated fashions in technology.
Considerable breakthrough, actually. A battery that can power a car.
But good writing and production always holds up. That's why people who weren't born when it was in production have embraced Columbo in recent years, which again, to reiterate, is the reason we pop a spoiler warning at the start of each video. Also, what's with all this Columbo shit? We probably aren't doing Columbo anytime soon.
Ready? Aim!
Fire!
The Magician didn't rate amazingly, and midway through its season, there's a fairly sharp retinkering of the series. Tony ditched the private plane and now lived in a top-floor apartment in the Magic Castle. That's Magic Castle, which is a real-life LA club where people perform magic. It might seem a bit of a come down for Tony Blake, the famous stage magician who once lived on his own private jet, now living in a flat above his office. Maybe he couldn't maintain the payments on the jet. Also, aviation fuel is expensive, and when you think about it, the upkeep on an apartment is less onerous than keeping a jet. I mean, jets avoid property tax, but you don't usually have to file a flight plan for your house. Maybe Tony had to declare bankruptcy since he kept blowing off high-paying gigs so he could investigate some pissant crime or other. He did at least get to keep the Corvette. His former pilot Jerry hangs on, well, at least for a couple of episodes, acting as Tony's assistant. Dennis is completely gone, and his dad Max appears just one more time.
One of our most famous resident magicians, Mr. Anthony Blake!
Now we have Dominic, who runs the Magic Castle. That's Magic Castle, whose story function seems to be a combination of room service, answering machine, and pimp.
Holograms. That statue was never there in the first place.
No, Dominic.
No, wait a minute. Don't give me that no, Dominic. I saw a demonstration once, Tony. They had an ashtray on a table. And when I went to reach for it, my hand went right through it. It's a special kind of photography. It makes it look real.
Tony Blake's version of a stage magician is one of the old school. He has no weird facial hair, does not make buildings disappear, nor does he have television specials. His very best trick is making his private jet suddenly disappear mid-season.
He's very cool.
Tony's confidence with his magic and his extraordinary reflexes do set him up as being on another level to all of the bumbling thugs he crosses swords with. However, at no point does Tony's magic ever become so overpowered that he could just will villains out of existence. Unless, of course, that's what happened to Dennis. Personnel changes behind the cameras brought a different focus, making most plots a lot more standard, with Tony often having a personal stake in the plot rather than just offering help to a total stranger. There was also a little bit more ordinary magic in the episodes, which usually consisted of showing us a bit of a magic act in the Magic Castle. That's Magic Castle. Tony Blake usually reserved his illusions for outsmarting criminals or just showing off. There also seemed to be an upswing in standard chase sequences. I found the retooled episodes had less charm than the first half of the season.
Win a few, lose a few.
Episode titles now begin with The Illusion Of, which does seem like the title of a Hardy Boys themed choose your own adventure. Later episodes show Blake being a little less of a magical superhuman who no longer smoothly sidestepped fistfights. Moving to the Magic Castle seems to have enhanced his love life if nothing else. Apparently, living in a magic club opens doors.
Open sesame.
See?
Watching The Magician is like any show of its time. It has a lot of, oh, I know that guy, I know that lady, I know that kid, I know that girl, and him and her and him and her.
Well, I'll just have to peddle my pussycat elsewhere.
No, wait.
The credits for the show have a lot of names from other Paramount shows of the era, a fair few staff who'd worked on the recently ended Mission Impossible series. The show's creator, Bruce Lansbury, would have his banner on a number of shows that oddly died suddenly, and he was of course the brother of Angela Lansbury. In the show itself there were early roles for Mark Hamill and Tim Matheson, and of course there's the ever-reliable Jessica Walter. Bixby's first wife Brenda Benet appears in one episode. There are also lots of character actors like Anthony Zerbe, Mark Leonard, Joseph Wiseman, just a lot of faces you'd see on the box back in the day. And of course, William Shatner. We'd never get far without pointing out William Shatner.
Do you know what you're saying? Yes, I do.
But I'm going to focus on this guy, Larry Anderson, who was an actor who also did magic. At the time, assistant to the show's magic consultant. He would often pop up in shows when they needed somebody who could do their own magic. A non-magic role had him briefly playing Michael Long, who would of course be reborn as Michael Knight.
You've got exactly 2 minutes.
One last random factoid, one of the show's staff writers was David Chase, who years later would go on to create The Sopranos. Magician episodes would have varied plots. Tony helps somebody by investigating a missing loved one, which leads into some espionage plot.
Tony, for God's sakes, will you stop trying to find mysterious plots?
Tony tries to find out what happened to a hospital patient back in his hometown. Tony investigates his girlfriend's suspicious death. These storylines were pitched at a reasonably mature level, rather than the light-hearted and unchallenging fare aimed at family audiences.
This is a brand new script.
Later episodes, which may have been affected by a Writers Guild strike at the time, don't have a lot of the same weight. That said, the premises don't feel overly familiar like a lot of the shows of the time.
I'd say that's a pretty fair assumption.
Even with the retooling, The Magician never reached the ratings it needed to continue, and the show was cancelled in early 1974.
We've really got to nail that Bill Bixby audition Thursday.
We're auditioning for the Incredible Hulk?
Even so, it has remained relatively fondly remembered, and would be referenced in Bixby's later series, the name of which temporarily escapes me, and also Quantum Leap and The X-Files.
I'm a magician.
From its memorable theme tune to a rather cool use of magic, Magician was a show that feels like they had found a groove for making an entertaining show, but just wasn't one that enough people watched at the time. As a show that wasn't dumbed down for kids but was probably watched by kids with their families, Magician seems like a credible near miss. A premise that with a bit of perseverance from the network could have actually been a fairly long-running series.
Timing is everything.
The first time I'd heard of The Magician was when it was shown locally on cable television in the late 90s. A show you'd watch when you ran out of Incredible Hulk episodes. Why did I watch The Magician for a review? Honestly, I ran out of Incredible Hulk episodes.
You've been doing too much of that.
Bill Bixby had already been directing TV episodes before beginning work on The Magician, and he would direct what became the final episode of the series. After The Magician, he went on to alternate between acting gigs and directing television episodes. He appeared in various movies and television shows for the next few years before landing what is possibly his biggest role, the troubled scientist Dr. David Banner in The Incredible Hulk, which would debut in 1977.
Harry, I don't think a great actor like Bill Bixby and magician is gonna play a green comic book character.
The premise of a non-superhero magician solving crimes is a cool one, and hasn't been done too often. While it's a very different type of show to The Magician, the most successful take on the idea would probably be the long-running British series Jonathan Creek, a series about a man who designs the illusions for a stage magician.
I simply hate magic.
But you're president of the toy company.
I hate toys, too.
Pretty much every other show about magic is about supernatural magic rather than illusions.
He's in the hospital. You get him out of the hospital.
That's what we were planning to do, but we want to check with you first. You have to go so fast.
The Magician was a credible attempt at an interesting mix of action-adventure and detective series that didn't connect with the critical mass of viewers, but its premise and execution along with its star make it something that's still quite enjoyable and unique. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
The money! The money! Look at that money! The money is so good! It's so good!